So big fight at featherweight happening in just a couple of weeks. Ilia Topuria is going to challenge Alexander Volkanovski for that strap. Now, I want to talk about a lot of aspects of the fight, and we'll do multiple videos leading into the fight, but I want to talk specifically today about what Alexander Volkanovski needs to do in order to get his hand raised. You know, he's in very unfamiliar territory. He's coming off of a knockout loss, and one, Volk almost never loses, and then two, he almost absolutely never loses by knockout. So what do you see as being some points of strength for Volk? What does he need to watch out for from Ilia Topuria? And what sort of game plan do you think he should come into this fight with?
Well, as a fight fan, I'm always excited to see Volkanovski compete. But after that last fight, and I know he took it on a few days' notice and he didn't get his hand raised, but ever since then, he's just been clamoring to get back in there. And I have a feeling Volkanovski is going to have another one of those y'all must have forgot type of moments. I'm not going to give my prediction away or the way I'm sort of leaning towards how this fight's going to end, but Volkanovski is one of the best fighters skillfully on the planet. There's not even, I mean, Islam's now technically pound for pound number one, but if you put Volkanovski at number two, even still, nobody would bat an eye. He's so talented. He's so good everywhere. And it feels to me like the world is sort of forgetting about everything he's done, his entire body of work, because he suffered a loss against Islam Makhachev in his last fight. And I think the biggest person underestimating him right now is Ilia Topuria.
Yeah.
I think Ilia sees this as like, oh man, the champ had his time. It's time for a new king in the division. And for me, when you see somebody go up and dare to be great and try to take the champ status, what they're doing is jumping up an entire weight class, and when you go from 45 to 55, you're dealing with a whole different body type. And Islam, yeah, he got his hand raised in the rematch, and it was only on 10 or 12 days' notice, but Volkanovski didn't look great in that situation, and it was kind of hard for him too. He knew going into there, he wasn't prepared, he didn't get a full camp, and he had to go out with a different game plan than anything he's usually done to try to beat Islam, get him out of there early, and try to go with like a KO or TKO. Now we've got a full camp Volkanovski set on 145, set on Ilia Topuria, and this is the division he's been cleaning out for years now. So for me, I think Volkanovski has that extra chip on his shoulder. He's always a high-level competitor. He's always just clamoring to get in the octagon, but this one seems a little bit more special. It feels like a fire was ignited in Volkanovski that most champions will never actually get to experience, because once you're a champion, you sort of feel like you can kick your feet up. Volkanovski feels like he very much so has a point to prove.
Yeah, this is full camp, chip on your shoulder Volkanovski.
Right.
So this is going to be entirely different than what we saw against Islam Makhachev. Islam Makhachev is sizably bigger than Volkanovski. Forget about the weight classes for a second. Islam is much taller, much bigger than Volkanovski.
Right.
As I know, Alex used to be 200 pounds at one point, but his stature next to Islam's is far smaller. Yeah. And so when you see him, you know, after the first loss, he went back in there against Yair Rodriguez, and everybody thought, okay, Yair is this very electric, dynamic striker, but he might be susceptible to some of the wrestling exchanges, and Volk might be able to get him on the ground and do some damage there. Not so fast. Volk went out there and beat Yair Rodriguez at what he does best, which is striking. If you haven't seen that finishing sequence, you got to go back and watch that sequence. The way he finished Yair Rodriguez, the patience, the shot selection, the technique.
A thing of beauty.
Unmatched, unbelievable. And I think that you're right. Ilia Topuria, if you were to ask me, name one person in the UFC right now who doesn't have the belt that you're 100% sure of will be a future champion, I would say Ilia Topuria.
Yeah.
So this is nothing against him whatsoever. He's a great fighter. He's also in his young 20s, so he's got some time to really progress, and you know, really as he starts to push that 30 mark, I think he can start to really do some things that will be great in years to come. But specifically speaking about how Volkanovski wins this fight, one, for the first time in a long time, Volkanovski's going to have an opponent that's relatively close to him in height.
Right.
Max Holloway and Yair Rodriguez are both pushing 6 feet. Islam Makhachev is a 6-footer. Volk has extremely good clinch. His clinch game is probably some of the best clinch game we've seen at featherweight in a long time.
Right.
The problem is when you're 5'6" or 5'7" up against a 6-footer, it's really hard to play the clinch.
Yeah, break the posture. posture.
I think you're going to see Topuria shoot for some wrestling exchanges and try to get Volkanovski to the ground to show him that he's actually the superior grappler. And I think the closeness in those exchanges will give Volk some opportunities to work the clinch. And I think he should do just that with the short elbows on the exchange, the hooks and stuff like that. The other thing that I think Volkanovski needs to do is he needs to move a lot. Topuria, the reason that he knocks a lot of people out and he's got a lot of power is because he's willing to bite down on his mouthpiece, plant his feet in the canvas, stand in the pocket, and exchange. And while Volkanovski can do that with the best of them, I'm not sure coming off of a knockout loss just a few months ago that he should really test his own chin in that regard that quickly, especially when he has the skill in his arsenal to be able to move around, and he uses incredible lateral movement so he can work a combination that starts with punches and finishes with kicks, and he's on the side of you by the time his exchange is done. It's almost like Vasily Lomachenko back in the day when he would box guys. The combination would start with him standing in front of the guy, and then he would finish the combination almost at a 90-degree angle to them. Volk's really good with doing that, but also including kicks, obviously, into it. And so finishing the sequence on whip kicks and stuff like that, if he can get Topuria roped into being stationary and really start to do some damage and score some points, he might get Topuria to where he's willing to chase a little bit because he's losing some of the exchanges. And that's where Volk can be really dangerous and also find a potential knockout of his own. So I think lateral movement is the advantage in that regard is going to be in Volk's favor. And I really think he should use that.
Yeah, and while Vasily Lomachenko's footwork is almost impossible to recreate,
next to none,
Volkanovski does have a lot more tools that he can utilize when he does create those angles for himself. And speaking of tools, he's got way more in his arsenal than Ilia Topuria has at least shown in the UFC. I'm sure Ilia can do all sorts of really interesting things when he's in the practice room. But when it comes to his competition inside the octagon, he throws really heavy leather. He's in there. He's not, like you said, afraid to exchange with anybody. And that's kind of what he wants out of his opponents. He wants them to sit in there and trade with him because he's really good at slipping and countering or pulling and countering. And he knows when to shell up with a high guard defense and when to utilize more of an active defense and use his hands for parrying and whatnot. And a lot of guys don't have the skills to hang with him in that realm, but Volkanovski certainly does.
Yeah.
And Volk has shown us time and time again that because he's the shorter guy against most of the people he goes against, he has to get past that kickboxing range and get inside, and then he's got to do his work in there. And we found that he's very successful once he gets inside and gets in that boxing range. And if that's where Ilia wants to take the fight, he might be in for a world of trouble and something that he wasn't exactly expecting, because Volkanovski has basically had to create a game plan and a style of fighting that utilizes that exact same philosophy. He's got to go inside against these long guys like Max Holloway and Islam Makhachev and get his punches in from a closer range. It's very difficult to do. That's why he's gotten so good at creating angles and closing the distance with his defense and then being able to score inside the pocket. So if you ask me, I think that Ilia Topuria would like to get this fight over with sooner than later, because Volkanovski can understand and read a fighter better than almost anybody. His fight IQ is insane, his game planning, and his game planning on the fly with his team. Once they have a couple of rounds of your information downloaded, they're going to be able to give him sound advice that not only he's picking up, but they're picking up as well. And they might be seeing things that even Volk's not seeing, and then they're able to communicate with him mid-round on what he's seeing. So for Ilia Topuria, I don't think you want to go all 25 minutes with Volkanovski. I think you need to get in there and get him out of there as quickly as possible, or your chances of winning go down and down and down as the rounds go away. And I think Volkanovski is the type of guy who can take this fight all 25 minutes, no problem, and start to slowly, just systematically tear you apart in every realm that you want to go. And if Ilia Topuria realizes on the feet it's a little bit more difficult of a puzzle to solve than he had anticipated, he might start looking for those takedowns. And while his takedown style and his wrestling style is completely different than Islam and the guys out of Team Khabib, we saw how difficult it was for Islam to not only get Volkanovski to the ground, but keep him there once he got him there. Volkanovski was like a fish that didn't want to be caught. When you catch him and he's just flailing all over the place, all very good high technique and high IQ stuff that he was doing, but he made it very difficult for Islam to get a hold of him. And I just think that Ilia Topuria is going to get desperate on the feet early on if he's not able to get Volk out of there, and he's going to start looking for desperate shots, and that's when you're going to see Volkanovski really open up with more of those angles and some of that crafty stuff that he likes to pull out of his arsenal and start hitting you with.
Yeah, I think he should work some offensive grappling of his own too. I think that's one of the things that confused Islam the most in his the first fight with Makhachev was that, you know, Volk was not just trying to disengage from the grappling exchanges, but going for reversals of his own, going for takedowns of his own.
Yeah.
When Islam was on the ground, he didn't just stand up and say, "Hey, let's go back to the feet." He followed him down there and started to do some groundwork. And I think in a lot of ways, Makhachev was almost kind of befuddled by that. He was like, "What the heck is going on here? Why is this guy trying to grapple with me? Nobody tries to grapple with me." And while Ilia Topuria is not to the level of Islam Makhachev as far as grappling is concerned, he does have a very, very high grappling pedigree, both in wrestling and in his submission game, his Brazilian jiu-jitsu as well. So I think the general consensus, if you ask most people who are fans that follow the sport, would say Topuria has the advantage in the grappling. And while I wouldn't necessarily argue in that realm, I would say that nobody really mixes up striking and grappling at 145 as well as Volk.
For sure.
He can start a combination with his hands, go to his legs, and then the next thing you know, he's doing a double leg on you. And if it's good enough to surprise even Islam Makhachev, it's certainly good enough to surprise Ilia Topuria. So I think he should actually look to work in some offensive grappling of his own. If he can get Topuria down a couple of times, Topuria may then say, "I'm going to try to answer for that and get him down." And if he gets too craven with the shots, that's where Volk might find an uppercut or a knee or a hook or something of that nature. So I think that the grappling shouldn't be taken off the table for Volkanovski. I think if it's there, take it.
Yeah, make no mistake about it. Volkanovski mixes the martial arts better than anybody. And if they put a gi on or if they put a wrestling singlet on, Ilia Topuria might be able to get his hand raised in that situation, but we're talking about MMA, and Volkanovski's wrestling in MMA, his jiu-jitsu for MMA, his defense on both realms of grappling, and his striking both offensively and defensively is as sound as a fighter can possibly ask for, and I think that Ilia Topuria has way less ways to get his hand raised than Volkanovski does.
Yes, and we'll have to break down those ways in the next video.
That's right.